What happens when two friends realize they own dozens of bottles of whiskey, but they barely know how to drink it? Well, they decide to learn, and you'll find out all about their amazing adventure in the book, A Year of Drinking Whiskey. And it's the story of an unexpected journey that began with dusty bottles sitting on a home bar shelf, and it turned into a 3-year adventure tasting 365 different whiskeys from around the world. We have return guest Patrick Sanaghan, who has put out books about creativity and about an interim college president. And he's a man of many talents and many things to say. And he is co-author with Mr. Tom Nicoletto, because we're not just singular people, right? We have many layers, many facets to what we do. We work, we play. And what Mr. Pat has figured out is this whiskey book that's different, because most whiskey books are written by experts, but Pat and Tom, they've written about the fascinating history and evolution of whiskey, how to properly taste. We're talking about appearance, nose, palate, and finish, the difference between different types like Irish, Scotch, American, Japanese, world whiskey, so much more. So he's here to tell us about just what his latest authorial, if that's a word, adventure is, literary adventure, we should say, and his whiskey journey for himself and perhaps you yourself as the reader listener. So, Mr. Pat Sanaghan, how have you been?
Very good, Robert. It's good to see you again.
Likewise, and it's always a blast speaking with you. And I think all the time about you have your other book on productivity, and so many times there are tasks that I procrastinate, I dread, and I tell myself, hey, I just need to put 15 minutes into just moving this project forward, including this meeting like this, right? We have the appointment on the calendar. We're here to record a podcast, and someone out there listening, hey, you can set aside 15 minutes just to learn or make some little bit of progress. And I'm sure that when you said, hey, you and Tom have this new idea, it's daunting to write a book. It's daunting to taste 365 whiskeys, but you have to start somewhere. You do it in little bits, don't you?
Yes, you do. Absolutely. Little bits, one step at a time. And over time, you can run a marathon over time. And that's exactly what happened here. It was a 3-year journey instead of a 1-year journey.
And so I imagine 3 years, because to drink 365 whiskeys in a year, that's a recipe for liver failure, right? That'll knock you out. So you have to space it out some.
Yeah, you have to space it out. Well, we came up with the brilliant title after a couple of whiskeys, and you become very brilliant. And we said, hey, wouldn't it be nice to have a year of drinking whiskey, 365? And we were wrong, and it took us about 3 years with 2 people. And it was a wonderful journey, because we didn't know anything about whiskey. I mean, and we had a lot of whiskey bottles that were given to us by clients and friends, but never really explored it. We were more wine and beer drinkers. And we were sitting in Tom's home bar and looked at all these bottles and said, this is silly. We got lots of these whiskeys, and some of them are very fancy and expensive. Why don't we learn how to drink the stuff? And that's how the journey began. And it's been a pretty interesting, whimsical kind of thing. We've been in a lot of bars, a lot of bartenders. And in fact, one of the co-authors is a guy named Julius Facenda. And we met him about halfway through when we were kind of plateauing out. There's only so many bars that, you can go to and things like that. And Chambers 19 is a little place here in Doylestown, Pennsylvania, where I live. And he's a wonderful bartender, and he has a deep interest in whiskey. So he helped teach me a lot more right in the middle there when we were kind of faltering. He taught me a lot, and we said, hey, you got to be part of this project, write some chapters for us, and give us some advice. So it's 3 of us. It's Tom, who I've known for 50 years, and then Julius I've known for a couple of years. And it's so we brought an expert in with 2 pilgrims.
Oh, very cool. So you had multiple people working on this project, and you think about, there are like certain like snooty highbrow details in life, right? You figure if you're a young kid, poor, uneducated, all you know is like the light beer at the grocery store. But then you figure, well, if you're older, wiser in your years, or maybe you touch the periphery of the upper crust of society, right? You get some taste. There are like just like more mature adults just skills and tastes to acquire. And so I can see how someone might say, like, okay, well, if I want to like kind of broaden my palate, expand my horizons, the wine tasting gets so much attention, it seems, at least
Yep.
where I'm at, right? And there's like that movie Sideways where they like, put their nose in it and swirl it around and say, I'm detecting notes of oaky afterbirth, right? People like write poems about the tastes
Yep.
of their wine. And like, so you've done this for whiskey, and so you said you looked around, you had all these different bottles from gifts over the years, and you said, hey, maybe we should figure this out for ourselves and
Yep.
catalog and categorize. When you made this journey and you wrote this book, is there anything that surprised you? Anything that, like, you set out, you had some idea of what the book would be about? Were there any nuggets that maybe unexpectedly revealed themselves in this process?
Yes. Thanks for the question. I think that the biggest lesson I would take away from writing this book is to trust your palate, trust your taste buds. And you can spend a fortune. And believe me, I live near New Hope, Pennsylvania, and there's a guy there that owns a bottle of whiskey that's $1.2 million. Now, obviously,
Jeez.
that's a collector's item. You're never going to drink it. You're just going to have it to brag about it. But you can easily spend $1,000 for a bottle of whiskey. And what we learned, a lot of times, $40 and $50 bottles from our taste were just as good, if not better, than the more expensive ones. So don't get sucked into the marketing, and there's all kinds of black label and blue label and gold labels. I mean, they spend a fortune on marketing to kind of suck people in who don't know much about whiskey and say, well, it's a $200 bottle of whiskey. It's got to be good. And you taste it, you go, I don't think so. So trust your taste is kind of the lesson of the book. And you don't have to spend $200 and $300 and $400 for a good bottle of whiskey. If you have 40 or $50, there's hundreds and hundreds of really tasty whiskeys.
Very good. So yeah, you figure out the right fit, the sweet spot for you, and what you like. And so I have to confess, like, I don't really know what whiskey is, right? We know that, like, vodka comes from potatoes and wine comes from grapes, and you hear about whiskey and, like, they have it in the barrels in the Highlands of Ireland and age it for years,
Scotland, yep.
decades. But where does whiskey even, like, come from? What's the process?
Well, the process is pretty complicated, and you can get lost in the details of that. But basically, they take grains like wheat and rye. Corn's big in American whiskey, which is usually bourbon, right? You have to be an American bourbon, you have to have 51% of the ingredients, or the mash has got to be corn. So it's a corn base, and then they add some other things into it. And it's basically a cereal, and it goes through a process of getting them wet, and it ferments a little bit, and then they wash it a couple of times, and the sugars that come out of the natural process, and then that's what gets distilled. But to get into the details of that is not all that helpful, because
Sure.
some of it's chemistry, some of it's physics, some of it's hundreds of years old of wisdom and knowledge and things like that. And one of the things we came away with was there's a lot of thought, time, patience, and money put into the process. I mean, so we respect anyone who's in the whiskey business. And we say that in the book, that we kind of give grades to the whiskeys we tried. We tried 365. We give an A, a B, or a C. We didn't give any D's or F's, but we'll let people know. We know it takes time and effort and money, and we appreciate it. And if you get a C, we're not trying to be mean. We're just trying to communicate very clearly how we experience the whiskey. And one other thing, Robert, what we did is we made sure that for quality control that we tasted each whiskey neat. And what that means is right out of the bottle. You don't water it down and put ice in it and all kinds of other stuff. There's nothing wrong with that. Old fashions are my favorite cocktail now. But we tried each one neat. And it just kind of leveled the playing field as far as giving each whiskey kind of an equal chance. Can I mention two other things, Robert?
Of course.
A lot of times you want to make sure you have a glass, that is kind of cupped. You don't have a big old martini glass. There's certain glasses just made. Glencairn is the kind of famous brand. And one of the things we would suggest you do is you put a half a glass, which would be about an ounce, and you let it sit for about 10 minutes. And that's something that a lot of people don't do. They get a glass and all of a sudden they're sipping away, and it opens up, because a lot of whiskey can be a little bit harsh. especially if you're 100, 110, 120 proof. There's a couple whiskeys we had that were pretty strong. And a lot of the Scotch whiskeys are really strong. You open up the bottle and you can smell peat from across the room. So we suggest that you do it neat and let it sit for a little while. And then, like you said about the wine, I mean, some of that's pretentious. And there's a lot of pretentiousness in whiskey reviews. We have a couple reviews that are 3 pages long. Like you said, I can taste the grass on the left side of the sun, and the cows I can hear the cows. I mean, it's just the silliest thing in the world. So we try to make all our reviews very quick. And then you smell it just like a wine. What you don't do, and I saw a video of a guy, a very famous British guy, and he said, "Oh, put your nose in there and get a really whiff." Well, you do that, you won't be able to smell anything for about 2 days. So just waft it and smell it, and you'll smell all kinds of interesting things like butterscotch, caramel. These are things I never thought. I even smelled chocolate once on one of the whiskeys. I said, "Where did the chocolate come from?" So there's a lot of complexity. It's part of the process. And then just take a sip, swish it around, enjoy it, and then swallow it. Just don't gulp it down. Like when the cowboys used to see the movies, they get in a big glass of whiskey, knock it down, go, "Oh God!" And that's not the way to drink whiskey. Take your time, sip it a little bit, and enjoy both the nose, as they say, the smell, the aromas, and then the taste.
Oh, very good. Well, I like the detecting the little bit of the scientific method and the academic curiosity of it, because like with your grading system and just kind of going through multiple like samples, so to speak, you're giving me flashbacks. I think I was like in like 6th grade or something, and I grew tomato plants and I tried different like fertilizers and watering and soil, and it's when you just describe it on the surface, it seems a little dull, but then when you get into it and you like kind of have some hypotheses and do some experiments, like it can be exciting no matter what it is, right? If you know guys that are big with cars or motorcycles,
Yep.
you don't have to be as much of an expert as them, but it's kind of fascinating to think about like the engineering or the things people have tried, or if you have like a Harley Davidson, it's loud in this way, or if you have like a diesel truck, it's kind of just fun to dip your toe into the intellectual curiosity of it all. And then there's also this kind of idea of when you have enough of the sampling, you can kind of like you can pull it apart and figure out the layering, right? It's like if you ever like study music and then you like say, hey, well this is this musical style that began, or when you say like, hey, there are these multiple instruments or things like in a song when they kind of like they start slow and they add different parts to it, and then once you recognize it, you hear it, you can't unhear it, like increases your enjoyment of the music. And so I imagine with you kind of knowing about the letting the whiskey breathe, or you detect the chocolate, then once you kind of taste it or you recognize it, you can never go back to the simple ignorance you had before.
Right. No, it's very quick. I was out in Arizona for the last week or so. Got in yesterday, and a nice man knew I drank whiskey and had written a book. So he said, "Oh, let me try this one." He pulls out a very nice bottle of whiskey, and he proceeds to pour the whiskey, and then has a handful of ice. So I'm saying to myself, not as a snob, but that's just going to destroy that whiskey. So if you're going to have ice in your whiskey, try to get it in a big ball or a big cube. Don't put a bunch of ice in there because it'll water it down in less than a minute. Then you have a watered down drink. Now, he didn't know that, and I didn't say anything, obviously. But 3 years ago, I would have said, hey, that sounds good. It'd probably be a little bit lighter. But the minute I saw him do that big handful of ice, I said to myself, oh, boy, he's just ruined a very nice glass of whiskey. So that's your taste point. I mean, if you want some ice in your thing, just stay away from handfuls of small ice. Use big ice so it'll melt slowly and it keeps the flavor full.
Ooh, that's a very, very nice tip. Nice education. And you hear about some of these things, right? Where like they add like a few drops of water to unlock the flavor. Or there's the cool glasses, or like the spherical big ice cubes, and they look so dang cool. And and so when with like any kind of like alcohol or whiskey, obviously like it's a tool. It can be dangerous, can be overused. And I know like that when I was younger, I stopped drinking completely because I realized that like when you're like on the way up emotionally, when it's kicking in, the feelings are changing, then like the random ideas you have can be connected to the warm fuzzy emotions, and sometimes you give too much weight to the thoughts that you have, and you think, hey, I had a really good idea. Well, it's because the warm and fuzzies were kicking in, but in
Right.
moderation, it can be a useful tool, right? If you don't overdo it, you can kind of change the channel and think in new ways. And so what interests me about this book is you say like there were personal reflections, surprises, and lessons learned along the way. So there's not just the mechanics, the chemistry, but
Right.
there's also like the thoughts and ideas. So like what was that about? What were the personal reflections and surprises?
Well, I think you just alluded to it. You don't sit all night and knock down a bottle of whiskey. I mean, that's a choice point, obviously, but that's going to destroy your brain and it's just not going to be enjoyable. The most we ever drank at a sitting was 2 different shots. That was our kind of commitment. And after that, then you get really kind of stupid. So, and some people's alcohol tolerance is very low. They might just have 4 or 5 sips and all of a sudden feel in a different place. You and I talked a little bit about this before. I wrote a book on creativity a few years ago. And what they found was a beer or a glass of wine, and oftentimes that's all max, because after the second or third, you're blotted, can open up and just relax you a little bit, so you're open to some different ideas. So I don't want to say drinking whiskey is going to make you creative, but there's some research that indicates a small sample of alcohol, and that's not obviously appropriate for alcoholics. I mean, I understand that. Can open you up a little bit, that can relax you a little bit, and all of a sudden be open to some other ideas. But yeah, the most we ever did. And then the other thing too is don't eat food with your drinking whiskey. I mean, eat like an hour and a half ahead of time so your stomach is somewhat full, because it'll mess with your palate. And I'll give you a real quick example. I was at a restaurant, ordered a nice shot of whiskey, and a young lady next to me had some meatballs delivered right next to me, right there. And the smell of the meatballs, I couldn't taste the whiskey.
Oh,
And most people don't realize it doesn't have everything to do with your mouth. It's your nose and your mouth that are together. In fact, some whiskey connoisseurs think the nose is just as important as the mouth. And I was just surprised. Beautiful smelling meatball, and I'm sipping the whiskey, and I'm saying, I can't taste the darn thing at all. So a perfume in a place, a strange smells in a place can mess up with your experience of drinking whiskey. So if you're in a smoky bar, you're going to have a different experience than if you're in a bar with no smoking allowed. It's going to be a dramatic difference. But we had no more than 2. And I was very fortunate in that the town I live in has about 4 different bars and restaurants. So even if I had 2, I could walk home. I'm only 2 blocks away from the center of town. So you want to make sure that you have a plan B around safety, to say the least, because it can hit you pretty hard. Whiskey, 100 proof whiskey wine's about 13 or 14%. Beer's about 7 or 8%. So a glass of whiskey is a very intense experience. So just moderation is very important.
oh yeah, it can sneak up on you. But
Absolutely.
so you're saying there's like many environmental factors, and I keep just thinking about the parallels to the wine tasting, which seems to get all the credit, right? With the wine,
Right.
they pair it with certain foods, or they use the
Yeah.
wine as like a palate cleanser, so that way that you can kind of go like the drink and then the food and experience those
Yeah.
things kind of atomically, as it were. And so you and Tom try these 365 whiskeys, and whenever you have 2 guys, like remember Siskel and Ebert, it was always fun when they
Right.
disagreed and one said thumbs up,
Right.
one said thumbs down. So
Yep.
when you did this grading, or you had your personal preferences, did you and Tom ever disagree at some point?
2 things. That's a great question. We came up with our top 10 whiskeys. I did mine, Tom did his, and Julius did his. And there's only one that's in 2 of the list. So our tastes are different. And in the book, it was just by happenstance. It wasn't by strategy. We covered about the same six whiskeys, and our grades were within a plus of each other, like a B plus or a B. There was only once where I gave something a B plus and Tom gave it a C. So sometimes you have different tastes. But that was a little bit of a surprise. But it was funny when we were compiling our favorite whiskeys. There was very, very little overlap, and so that's part of the unique experience of whiskey drinking. But the environment's important. And the environment's important. I mean, you want to make sure it's not a bunch of smells and things like that, so you can really enjoy it. And it's meant to be sipped. Enjoy it, sip it, have a nice conversation with somebody, but don't be gulping it down.
Right. Have some culture, right? We're not animals. And it's good
Right,
that
right, right. Yeah,
we're trained by you to know what to do. And then it's also just kind of fun, because when people like talk about their favorite movies or TV shows, you see where the overlap is, or like if someone says, hey, I really like the crime dramas, and someone says, "Hey, I like the romantic comedies," then if you get to know a person's personality even a little bit, then you can say, "Okay, well, this person I relate more to Pat than to Tom, or Tom
Mhm.
reminds me of this friend I had in college." Then, like, based on the template of the person, you can say, well, now I know if I might like this, or it just gives me an idea of what I'm getting myself into. And so this is just a fun project
Yep.
experiment that you guys had, this journey and this book writing. But because you're the star of the show, and we're here talking about your book, which is called A Year of Drinking Whiskey, Two Old Geezers and a Great Bartender Sailing Down Whiskey River, in these final few minutes of our discussion, Mr. Pat, do you think
Yep.
there might be a missing question about all this that I should be asking you? I just don't know what to ask you.
A missing question that's interesting. It's intriguing. I think. Would you do it again? Because that's a 3-year commitment. It wasn't like we were knocking down whiskeys every day and 4 times a day. But it took a long time, and we were very careful in the reviews. So we did a thoughtful process, and I uh, I would consider doing it again because now I know a lot more than I did before, and I might focus more on a particular whiskey, like the Japanese whiskey, which is a very good entree point. Japanese whiskey is very sophisticated and tends to be a little bit lighter. So if someone says, "What should I start with?" I'd say I would suggest you start with Japanese whiskeys. They're not inexpensive, but they're just smoother and gentler and things like that. So I'd probably say 101 Japanese or Irish or Scotches as opposed to 365. So could even dig a little bit deeper because we cover a lot of bases with this book, and sometimes digging deep would be kind of an interesting thing to do.
Yeah, that sounds even more exciting, right? That sounds more niche and specific. And I think there's something to that template because, like, a few years ago, I came across an attorney, and he wrote a book about like how to get the corner office, right? How to rise up in the ranks. And he said that he
Right.
spoke to 100 plus attorneys who had done it and kind of figured out separating the cream from the crop, and figured out, well, what are the common success factors and what's the random noise that doesn't matter. And it reminded me of, there's this old book, Think and Grow Rich, where they did something similar to people that like had achieved huge success and wealth. They
Yep.
just said, like, hey, let's talk to 100, 200 of the richest,
Yep.
oil robber barons of the 1920s, and figure out, well, what do they all have in common, or just what rises to the top. And it seems like you've done something similar with this book, A Year of Drinking Whiskey, and with the possible future sequels where you get more
Right.
deep dive into the Japanese. Just if I look at hundreds of these and get all those repetitions, the reps, as the fitness guys say, then
Right.
what rises to the top? It's a fun concept that we can all relate to.
Absolutely. Yeah. I would dig a little bit deeper on one brand of whiskey as opposed to trying to cover a lot of bases. That's what our wasn't a mistake. That was our interest was, well, we just can't do Japanese or Scotch and malts. We got to try as many as we can. And so we cover a lot of territory. We have some whiskeys from Iceland, which they need a lot of work in Iceland. Boy, they really are tough drinks. But we said, hey, we did some traveling. Tom spent 3 weeks in Ireland, and he learned a lot about Irish whiskey. So part of this was a lot of fun too, just traveling and seeing different cultures in different countries and what their whiskeys were like.
Oh yeah, and that's the world that we live in now, right? Of infinite choice, and everything can be communicated or shipped to you, or you can travel to it. It's not like the Middle Ages where if China was over there, like you could
Right.
never even in your whole lifetime make your way across the Silk Road, but now you get on a plane or get something sent in, and it's
Yep.
an amazing world of discovery that we definitely should not take for granted. And so we've been saying this book is called A Year of Drinking Whiskey, Two Old Geezers and a Great Bartender Sailing Down a Whiskey River, by Patrick Sanaghan and Tom Nicoletto. And what's a logical way to find out more or get the book? Do you recommend someone just go to Amazon and search for
Yep.
it, or what's the
All,
next
all my
step?
books are on Amazon Books, and there's an ebook version, and then there's a paperback version. And the sales are beginning, so we hope to sell things. And just so you know, we're not going to make our first million on this book, I can assure you. But anything we do make, our agreement with Tom and I and Julius was it'll go to a charity of some kind, and we have some charities that we've got identified that we already help. So uh, we don't make a lot of money on the book, but whatever money we do make will go to a charity of some kind. That was our commitment.
Very nice. So it's just a fun project, even once the writing is done. And so that's by Pat Sanaghan, Tom Nicoletto, and Julius Facenda. And we'll have a link underneath this podcast, but you can go on Amazon and search A Year of Drinking Whiskey and find it, get it digitally or in paperback format. And as we're checking that out, before I let you go, Mr. Pat, it's time for the scary part of the podcast where I
Oh,
try to stump you, I try to put you on the spot by asking about a fun or interesting quote or lesson that has served you. So, what comes to mind as far as a fun or interesting quote or lesson?
I think I go back to the first comment I made. The biggest lesson was whatever you do, take your time, enjoy it. It's an enjoyable experience, and trust your taste buds. Trust your taste buds. You can have $100 bottle of wine. I've had a few of those in my day, and I don't get it. I just don't get it. I never spend $100 for a bottle of wine. I can afford to do that, but I just have never found that it's worth that kind of money. And whiskey, oftentimes, you can spend. I mentioned to you earlier, the Dalmore label is a wonderful label. This is 21 years old. It's very expensive, but the Dalmore 12 is my favorite whiskey. So you can spend a lot of money, or about $50 for my opinion, is a great whiskey. So trust your taste buds, and you don't have to spend a fortune. And just trust your instincts. Don't be listening to somebody else's. Oh, it's a great whiskey. You might not find it's a terrible tasting whiskey, but trust your taste buds and enjoy yourself with this. And don't overdo it, obviously, but it can be a really interesting journey.
Yeah, it's like there's objective success, but there's also subjective success, right? There's like, oh, overall, what's the accepted, what's great, but then there's, hey, what do you personally like, which you never know unless you try, right? That's why career day exists at school or different elective classes. You have to go out and figure out what you personally like. I love it.
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely. Have a lot of electives. There's a lot of whiskey out there.
Yeah, so when you're considering those whiskey electives, don't just go into it without a plan. Get this book, A Year of Drinking Whiskey, Two Old Geezers and a Great Bartender Sailing Down Whiskey River by Patrick Sanaghan, Tom Nicoletto, and Julius Facenda. As he said, it's very simple, down to earth, non
Yep,
pretentious. I'm not going to talk for 3 or 4 pages about one sip they had. It's for
right.
curious beginners, casual drinkers, and anyone who has ever looked at a shelf of those whiskey bottles and wondered, where do I start? You start with the book, A Year of Drinking Whiskey by Pat Sanaghan. And thanks so much, Mr. Pat, for showing up, stopping by, and just telling us
Thanks.
about this fun project you had.
Thanks, Robert. I appreciate it very much. This is fun. Bye bye.